Hands-on with the Moto G4 and the Moto G4 Plus. How goes it, ladies and gents? This is Jeff Benjamin with 9 to 5 Google. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Moto G series because it gives you a lot of smartphone for a little bit of money, and that is the case here with the Moto G4 and the Moto G4 Plus. Now, the Plus model is obviously the upgraded model. You're going to pay a little bit more for the Plus model, but it has some additional bonus features that you just don't get with the lower tier Moto G. But both devices are pretty similar, almost exactly the same in fact, and it would be hard for someone just glancing at these phones to differentiate the two because they just look that similar. There's only a few differences, and those differences we'll outline here in this video. Now, for the most part, I've been using the Moto G4 Plus because it has that fingerprint sensor, which is the big difference between it and the Moto G4. Now, that said, there are some downsides or some limitations, I should say, when it comes to that fingerprint sensor, and we'll discuss that more in depth in this video. Now, the other big difference is the camera. The Moto G4 Plus contains a 16 megapixel rear-facing shooter with some additional goodies. Now, there are several different SKUs to choose from, starting with the Moto G4 Plus. It starts at $249.99 and it goes up to $299.99. And the Moto G4 starts out at $199.99 and goes up to $229.99. Now, like previous Moto Gs, the back cover is removable, and Motorola sent over several different SIM cards as well for me to test out because this is an unlocked phone and it works with all US carriers. So Verizon, AT&T, here's Verizon right here, works with AT&T as well, as you'll see right here. Also works with Sprint, and of course T-Mobile as well. Now, both the G4 and the G4 Plus feature 5.5-inch displays. These are LCD IPS displays, and you can see how it stacks up against smaller devices like the iPhone 6 and larger devices like the LG G5 and HTC 10. And both devices run at 1080p, so you're not going to get that super high resolution you see on some flagship devices, but as long as you're not running VR applications, you should be okay. The rear of the devices, where the camera module lies, looks very similar, although you will notice a laser autofocus module at the top of the G4 Plus. The top of the front face looks exactly the same, 5 megapixel front-facing shooter, and also an earpiece/speaker at the top. On the right, you'll see a textured power button and volume rocker, and then at the bottom of the device, you'll see a micro USB, no USB-C to be found. But you do get Qualcomm's quick charge technology for extra fast charging. Motorola dubs it turbo power. I was able to charge the Moto G4 from dead to 42% in about 30 minutes. The biggest downside by far is the lack of NFC. Now, you have a fingerprint sensor, but no NFC, which means you don't get Android Pay support. That is a major bummer in my opinion. Now, at 5.5 inches, the Moto G4 is much bigger than its predecessor, so keep that in mind, but if you're used to big smartphones, this is going to be an easy transition for you. Now, the fingerprint sensor is a little awkward because it's just a fingerprint sensor, but I still find myself accidentally hitting the home button from time to time. That said, the fingerprint sensor is very responsive when it comes to waking up your device and unlocking your device, just like that. Now, the Moto G4 features a 13 megapixel rear-facing shooter running at f2.0 aperture, and the Moto G4 Plus features a 16 megapixel rear-facing shooter running at f2.0 aperture. So let's compare the two. The Moto G4 Plus is on the left, and the G4 is on the right. And you can see with the G4, there's a lot more noise indicating that it had some trouble with that low light condition. So it had to bump the ISO up a little bit. We're going to check the ISO settings here in just a second, but you can definitely tell that the G4 Plus is definitely the superior camera and the device you want to get if taking photos is important to you. So let's check out the info section for the proof. And you can see right here, stats don't lie, G4 Plus, ISO 500, G4, ISO 1250, so the extra sensitivity was needed to compensate for the low light conditions on the lesser device. But the G4 Plus also has another advantage, laser autofocus and phase detection autofocus, so that's going to make focusing, in theory, much better on the G4 Plus. So here's the G4, and watch how focus works when I switch between subjects. Notice it's not able to really hone in on the wording until I come to a stop with the camera here. So you can see focus there in the background, then come up here and kind of move it around. You can see that it's having trouble actually honing in and focusing on the letters right there until I come to a stop like this. Now let's see how this works on the G4 Plus. So focus in the background here and then come into the foreground a little bit, and you can see instantly it's focused in, it's locked in on the wording on that camera in the foreground. Switch again and then move, and you can see it's locked in much quicker than the G4. Now with the G4 Plus, you have the option of purchasing a version at $299 with 4 gigabytes of RAM, and that's going to give you better performance when it comes to switching between apps and switching between browser tabs that are not going to refresh as often because they can stay in memory for a longer amount of time because there's more memory to spare. So that can make your phone feel faster because things load much quicker because they're already stored in memory and ready to go as soon as you open them up. And that applies to browser tabs. It also applies to just random apps as well. Now, Motorola is known for adding a couple of optimizations to the Android experience. I like Motorola because it doesn't inundate users with bloatware or just unnecessary skins, but it does provide some handy features like this. Get little gestures to turn on the flashlight and turn it off like that. Also a little gesture to launch the camera like that. And one of my favorite Motorola additions is called Moto Display, which allows you to view lock screen notifications in a more battery efficient manner. You just tap on them like that, and of course you can use swipe gestures to manage those notifications as well. So the Moto G4 and the G4 Plus builds on the tradition set by Motorola with previous G devices. There are some disappointments, as we've noted, primarily with the lack of NFC, but these are unlocked out-of-the-box devices that are running the latest version of Android, starting at only $199. Now, I do recommend that you opt for the Moto G4 Plus because of the better camera and the fingerprint sensor, but if the camera doesn't matter to you, fingerprint sensor doesn't matter to you, then you're getting essentially the same device with the Moto G4. Perfect for an extra Android phone or a test device, or if you just want to dabble into Android for the first time, these are perfect devices for that. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments section. This is Jeff with 9 to 5 Google.